Hello, fellow friends, fiends, and foes. I'm Shabby. Welcome to the first ever episode of my Expanding Of series, where I explore elements I'd love to see in my favourite franchises. Be it entirely new games or films, or simply small changes and additions to existing media. Today I'll be focusing on Little Nightmares. This could evolve into a comic or just a concept for a new game. I'm mainly doing this out of the love I feel for the media I consume. Often after fixating on a game, movie or show, I'll draw fan art or what they could do in the future, constantly making new projects that never actually end up anywhere. So hopefully this will allow me to finish some projects while not spending too much time on them. From the moment I played the first game, I was captivated by its unique style and overall atmosphere. The game strikes a good balance between hauntingly depressing, melancholic, yet somehow hopeful, thanks to its score and the occasional upbeat notes that evoke a sense of childlike innocence amid a world filled with darkness and despair. Naturally, I was thrilled when Little Nightmares 2 was announced and eventually released. The sequel added new layers to the emotions I experienced in the previous game, leaving me with a somber feeling at the end. I often find myself revisiting this world and watching lore videos from other creators about theories and what certain things could mean. This rich lore has left me hungry for more content, and even now I'm searching for videos to dive deeper into this mysterious world, tempted by the allure of nowhere. Because, in all seriousness, I have binge watched the living hell out of Little Nightmares lore videos. If you clicked on this video, you likely already have a pretty solid understanding of Little Nightmares lore, so I won't rehash any old events. What else? There's plenty of other content creators who have tread those hollowed grounds beforehand, so if you're after recaps and that sort of thing, I suggest you follow those footsteps. I already said spoilers? Yeah. On to the video, shall we? I want to craft a story centered around grief and the unwillingness to let go of the past, which manifests as nightmares for our young protagonist, Sui. He's a child who has endured more tragedy than anyone his age should have to bear, reflecting the harsh realities of life. By the end of the story, I want him to confront his fears, accept morality, and come to terms with loss, ultimately taking control of the haunting experiences in nowhere. In previous games, protagonists gained abilities reflecting their themes. For Sui, I envisioned a power that allows him to manipulate life cycles, either speeding them up or reversing them. Initially, this ability seems beneficial, but it ultimately reveals itself as a means to restart suffering. This bittersweet ending will create a sense of wonder and peace, only to unravel into dread and unrest, like an opposite mirror to Sui's adventure. My nightmares. As a child, I would always have a specific nightmare. There was a shed at an old house my family and I lived, and in my nightmares I'd be small enough to walk along the wood beams that kept the corrugated steel sheeting upright. Below me would be a long drop to water, and within that water would be wooden posts sticking out of it, like a docking area for boats. After a while of shimmying down, I would get down to the sea level, where I would see a large industrial factory with rust stains dripping down its rough concrete surfaces. The factory had a rusted chain link fence surrounding it, and around that a vast orange ocean with dead seaweed covering the surface. I hopped down into the water, seaweed up to my chest. I would try to make my way to the factory, but would be swept out to sea. My only hope would be a little yellow life raft. There I lay, floating out to sea, but like all things of safety, they eventually fail you. So the raft began to sink unnaturally fast, wrapping me in a yellow plastic blanket whilst I sank. When I would fully submerge, there would be many unfamiliar silhouettes in this rusty ocean. dark and formless, as if there weren't enough space in the ocean for these behemoths. A sudden wave of claustrophobia would wash over me, and I would wake up. I would have these dreams pretty frequently, and of course they disturbed me. I always felt the seaweed on the surface of the ocean in such volumes looked very unnatural, and the ocean, being particularly the opposite colour it's meant to be, could symbolise, I don't know, something, but who knows. Dreams are weird, and I thought I could make others experience my nightmares too. So his tragedy begins at the ocean. He once had a love for it, wanting to go out on the open ocean with his father, catching all manner of creatures from the depths, selling them to put food on the table and a smile on his mother's face. We'll circle back to smiles later on. Alas, the ocean betrayed Sui and took a pillar of his world, his father, along with his vessel-turned-tomb, the Kadari. Every time his father went out with his crew to the endless blue, Sui's mother would beg him to stay, always resulting in a puddle of tears and Sui's father gone to work. But this time the clouds whispered a different song, whose chorus grew to a screech as an unholy storm shook the very sand Sui's home laid, and thunder split the eardrums. Waves jumped from the sea like souls clawing their way back to land. The storm itself looked like an eye, but as suddenly as hell had looked upon those shores, they were no more. The ocean slept soundly, the gulls flew overhead. The sand slumbered as the tide tucked it in for an eternal rest. A storm like this was never seen again, and neither was Sui's father. In the present, Sui has been having many nightmares since his father died, which landed him into therapy. These sessions weren't all useless, they taught Sui some helpful advice he'd come to use later on in our story. During the main events of our story, Sui is constantly chasing after his father as he makes his march to his vessel. In Sui's nightmares, his father's faithful vessel becomes a monster, its barnacle-covered hull sprouting eyes from within and arms to grasp at which it could lose. Sporting a giant maw at the base of its hull, potentially the point in which it sank, maybe symbolising the need to feed was the reason for sinking. The eyes and the barnacles will look panicked and the arms will flail towards Sui as if grasping at straws. The ship will be rusted and from its rigging will hang the crew, for this vessel is a vessel of death in Sui's eyes. Out of the back of the vessel will be an amorphous fishtail, helping it glide beneath the waves blissfully like a whale, and on land, slithering like a snake. Its hull eating through the land, creating waves of previously sleeping sands. In the cab, a bright light will admit, lighting up the whole area, as Sui must hide beneath rubbish and wreckages beneath and above the waves. Endless is the Kadari's search for its captain's child, desperate to hold that which never got to sail. The crew hanging in the rigging will essentially act as mini-bosses that the Kadari will send after Sui in the hard-to-reach places giants can't go. These crew members, distorted by grief and corrupted by the sea and the very vessel they once crewed, many of them are blind, following the guidance of the vessel. Sui will have to be cunning with dispatching of these soulless sailors and outsmart an eternity of experience. Sui's abilities will have upsides and downsides, especially to the ending. Restarting the cycles of these bosses allows him to revert his father's vessel to a normal boat. Boarding the vessel with other bosses, he reverted back to children. They sail to the centre of his nightmare, a lighthouse, which will be seen through most of the story. The lighthouse acts as a curator of this particular nightmare, like the theatre monster from The Sounds of Nightmares and the signal tower from Little Nightmares 2. Where in the other media the protagonist became keepers for the monster or fleed it, Sui will destroy it. Sui and the others arrive at the lighthouse, yet blaring a deafening horn to ward them back. As they continue forward, the monster shows its real face. Between the bricks and glass, eyes and creepy crawlies make up this monster. It rips itself out of the ground and begins crawling backwards, holding its hand out as if begging for mercy. Sui jumps out the boat, landing on sand. The lighthouse's rusty ocean abandons its post. The lighthouse continues crawling back, Sui marching forward in his defiant bucket hat and gumboots, holding up his hand, forwarding the cycle of the pitiful creature, its horns starting to sound like the pleas for mercy. The creature's arms disintegrate and it can no longer pull its own weight. Not like this. Not this soon, the creature lets out its final words as it passes, leaving a misplaced lighthouse of a shell behind. Sui boards his boat once more with the other children, and they sail off through the fog to other nightmares. Speeding up Boss's cycles unlocks a different ending, where you gain access to an elevator. The elevator must be unlocked by collecting items from the other bosses, not including the vessel. These items will buy your way onto the elevator. This seemingly magical thing grants you other locations. The ending where Sui eliminates all threats instead of forgiving them seems like a dark ending, but perhaps he's simply moving on, dispatching without malice or hate, just acceptance. In this ending, you go for a deep sea walk, eventually ending up at the moor, where it has been abandoned. You walk through the empty halls, seeing everyone gone, making your way to the top. You see a bunch of gnomes looking out to a sea. You see many ships capsized with blackish smoke around them. A foghorn is heard as the Kadari breaches the fog, showing Sui hasn't escaped his nightmare and will be swallowed up by the vessel just to do the dream all over again. Sui must face his fears if he is to move on. As for where in nowhere this takes place, I wish for it to start at Sui's home, a shoreside shack he had grown up in. This small window where he was allowed to be a child were the best years of his life, being shown how to fish, make traps, and all round being taught some worldly knowledge from his seafaring father and his huntress mother. This shack will be distorted, the large crooked memory of his home. His mother in the waking world is in an endless depression, only being able to muster the strength to do basic tasks. So naturally, in nowhere, this has been made all that she is, a bedridden shadow of her former self, given up the fight. Inside the shack, Sui will be swallowed up underneath the bed's darkness, swept away by the orange sea. In these glimpses, he sees a yellow light in the distance, emitted by a vessel, but it's all wrong. It's underwater, and a fishtail propels it. As it turns its attention to Sui, it lights up hundreds of silhouettes chained down there, seaweed reaching up from the ocean's floor. As the ship picks up speed, Sui struggles to swim upwards and is eaten. Black envelops him, and he wakes up on a distant, unfamiliar beach. Time feels strange, like it should be night, but the orange hue of the ocean and sky suggests otherwise. Sui was taught to trust his intuition, so this unmatched colouring and feeling gives away the nightmare's hand, putting Sui on edge. Whilst backing away from the ocean's reach, he spies a ship appearing as if it scuttled, sinking but in reverse. It can't be the ship he jumped off, but as this thought ran under his big bucket hat, the vessel turns its light on. The ship isn't scuttling, it's surfacing. As Sui realises this, both he and the vessel set out in a sprint. From the distant foghorns scream out, Sui's little boots splash in the moist sands. He sees large shadows praying at something he can hide in. Sui sprints his heart out. He dives between the shadows, the familiar feel of beams and timber. He's beneath a shoreside shack. He pushes forward into the unknown, the horns and bells fading. Feeling some semblance of security, he waits there till the sun rises. Peering out, Sui is at the foot of a harbour town, a deserted place, old stores left to rot. The watermarks suggest a story of flooding. This is to be the main setting for the story. Within this harbour, Sui will make his way deeper inland, away from the ship, where he will begin coming into contact with other people. Distorted and manic, but people no less. Each new building Sui enters, the colder the whole place feels. The denizens of this place seem obsessed with teeth and having many paintings of perfect teeth. An odd sight for such a crooked place. Some teeth seemed even shinier than normal, metallic almost. The further inland he goes, the more of an outsider he feels. Eyes everywhere, metaphorically and literally. In Sui's travels, he spies barnacles staring at him. The further away from the vessel's influence, the less barnacles he'll come across. On the outskirts of the harbour, there will be a large manor, one seemingly out of place. Large and ornate, it stands over Sui as if taunting him to enter. Its door a crimson hue, with a equally crimson eye adorning it, watching. The door almost seems to writhe and wriggle, almost evading the ability to open it. Even the clock atop the building felt like eyes, the bricks around the windows and doors appearing like an open mouth. Once again following his intuition, Sui decides to take another entrance. This house will be home to strangers who entered the harbour many years ago and soon found their place. Strangers who made their wealth through sales, ship licensing and dental work. Inside the lobby resembles a hallway. This waiting area, I guess you could call it, has no floor. It's been ripped out many years ago, and in its place, many walking customers of the dentist. They stand there, shoulder to shoulder, their faces pointing to the sky. It's those very faces that create the new floor. Each face is sewn together, and you'll need to walk on them just to get to the dentist. The first floor, a litany of papers and filing cabinets laid haphazardly surrounding a desk like bodyguards. The desk had a dead fellow hunched over it, almost appearing as a desk ornament. In the opposite room, a dentist area, the location in which inhabitants in the lobby are waiting to go. This will be where the dentist resides, who is the first floor antagonist. On this floor, Sui will see how unorganized, twisted and crooked everything is, which will be jarring for when they go upstairs. Upstairs lies the family germaphobe, the perfectionist, where he has sorted everything alphabetically by colours and every other way imaginable. Everything on shelves positioned with precision and neatness in mind. Portraits even showing his compulsion from childhood. Downstairs, portraits will have him with a blindfold, earmuffs and bound hands to eliminate his senses, so he can stand to be downstairs next to the dead man's desk, showing he couldn't even leave his desk for a family portrait. He had to do work. To stall the perfectionist, Sui will need to make things unorganized, so when in pursuit, he will have to stop to fix them. Even in locations the perfectionist can't see, there are items organized through size or brow numbers. You see, he acts as a keeper of this mystical elevator. He must be perfect to go to the perfect location. Now there's other ways of going to them, and going that way you must pass through the fog or the ocean itself. Going for a walk on the ocean's floor, which is where Sui will come across a line of bloated people weighing themselves down with random objects like cinder blocks. The lighthouse will be the centre of this nightmare, and a final location Sui will venture. To escape the nightmare, you must wake up or be rid of the thing tormenting you in said nightmare. Loss and fear of death was the thing tormenting Sui, so he lets go of all that and no longer fears it. He can march up to the creature that brought him here and end this. Upon the lighthouse's island, there's remnants of cannons upon the fortress walls, barnacle-covered objects, insects, crustaceans, and all manner of crawling things scuttling around the island, often covered in barnacles too. The lighthouse's influence is that of the barnacle, a parasite feeding off you and the emotions that surround you. Barnacles. Barnacles will play a vital role in this installment of Little Nightmares. They essentially act like the eye cameras of the Moor, but for the vessel, although they don't turn anyone to stone. The people that the vessel seeks on Sui will be covered in barnacles. as they're a gateway for the many eyes and arms of the vessel. As you'll come to see, they even affect the poor gnomes of this stranded rusty sea. Speaking of which, I wanted to have the gnomes adapt to their environment, sporting shells on their heads as a way of camouflaging and evading the lighthouse's influence. The gnomes that Sui finds will have barnacles covering them. It will be up to Sui to search the area for utensils to free the gnomes of the vessel's control. Doing so will alert the nearby vessel-controlled enemies, but more often than not, the gnomes will lead you to a hiding place, and a hug may be exchanged. Now I hear you ask, how are there gnomes all the way out here? You'll come to find the orange oceans in this little nightmare aren't quite normal, and faraway things may be brought closer through the waves and fog. Horrifying smiles. Told you we'd circle back to smiles. The inhabitants of this area of nowhere all seem to have forced or insincere smiles being distorted and misused for the context they're in. In the normal world, many people going through tough times wear fake smiles to get through the day, so when you're in a place of unrelenting forces, those smiles stay on for longer. Their faces stretch as they struggle to keep the curves upright and their brows unfurled. To a child, seeing adults struggling to keep these false faces on becomes disturbing. A feeling of unease washes over you. An adult struggling or fail to fight back anger is very scary. Adults are meant to be the responsible people in situations, cool, calm and collected. They're bigger than you, and when they're a model parent or adult, they feel like a wall separating you from your nightmares. So when the adult begins letting go, forgets their responsibilities and allows their rage to take over, children see a completely different person. They see a nightmare to escape from. Inhabitants. In this iteration of Little Nightmares, there will be three main groups of people roaming here. The barnacle-covered bloated distortions of people the vessel Six and Sui. Their barnacles have eyes and arms writhing out of them, which is a dead giveaway of the Kadari's influence, or more specifically, the lighthouse's influence. Their skin will be a sickly pale hue with inflamed nostrils, eyes, ears and mouths. They will be perpetually wet, constantly leaking seawater out of their barnacles. The smell of sea salt and rotting flesh permeates the air in a cocktail of foulness. There are four unfortunate creatures hanging from the Kadari's mast. These are its original crew. Swemus uses wits to defeat all the members. There are some local inhabitants called the dental victims that haven't been snatched up by the Kadari nor the lighthouse just yet, but they themselves are also distorted, their skin pale and purple in appearance, and although unsightly, they are obsessed and repulsed by natural teeth and how they rot and die, resorting to a man called the dentist to extract all their teeth and replace them with a metal set. He nails them into their gums, each bite a sharp, satisfactory pain. As for the original teeth, I'm sure Sui will find out where they will go. As for who set such a trend, it was most likely a strange man that lives above the dentist's office called the Perfectionist. More on them in a bit. The third group are under the rusty waves, bloated waterlogged inhabitants of the depths. Their tongues swollen till they can't fit in their mouths, veins pop on their stretched faces, and torsos expand like balloons. They walk underwater in straight lines, deep-sea divers sporting helmets that resemble a familiar eye shape as cameras from a faraway place. These deep-sea divers watch the lines and ensure no one cuts them. Each bloated person carries an item of immense weight, keeping them on the ocean floor. If said item is dropped, they float away gracefully, unable to swim back down due to the gas build-up in their bodies. Where are they going, you may ask? If the divers' helms are of any indication, potentially the maw. Antagonist. The main antagonist of this story will be the Kadari, and by extension, the lighthouse, as that is the being controlling the shell of Sui's father's vessel. The lighthouse is the figure behind the curtain, pulling all the strings in this nightmare. There will be barely a location where it isn't visible. From afar it appears as a normal lighthouse, perhaps with a slightly more orange light. But it is this orange hue which gives it away. The ocean, the sky, the fog, even the eyes within the barnacles, all the same orange. This is the lighthouse's influence, its design. You may think the beam of light still spins, keeping up the appearance of a beacon, but that couldn't be further from the truth. The lighthouse blinks. This is why the light disappears for a second. There aren't any boats to warn of land. It is all a farce, a thinly veiled mask waiting to slip. The monster controls a shell that once represented freedom and has corrupted it, and is now doing everything in its ability to take that freedom away from Sui. The vessel and lighthouse, as said previously, have attributes that are shared with living beings: eyes, arms, a tail. It even has the fear of loss, just like our protagonist. Where Sui has lost already and is trying to cope with the acceptance aspects, the vessel is in the process of losing. The person in which it is afraid of losing is just out of reach, making it more and more desperate, to a point where it uses the crew whom are strung up in its masts. Speaking of which, the crew. The captain. The captain is a shadowy imitation of Sui's father, having the height and style but not the face. Always keeping his distance, the captain is used to lure our protagonist to the vessel, always keeping his back to Sui, as to not give away the trick. Farley, said to be the most spineless sailor to ever have been born. 'Tis a wonder how this slimy bugger ever became first mate. Marcos, a loyal deckhand having the skills and experience to handle pretty much every situation. Alas, when Sui's father faced the storm, it's fair to say more hands would have been preferable. Murray, or the Kid, the youngest sailor to ever have boarded the vessel. His clumsiness was said to be legendary, going overboard one time only to be rescued by the ship's netting. Burly Boris. This older gentleman was said to have sailed with Sui's grandfather, surviving the accident that killed his previous captain, weighs heavy on him. Mary the Pelican. A pelican who begins following the crew after losing his mate. Pelicans mate for life, so this gentle-hearted creature will remain alone forever. The twins, perfectionist and dentist. This place was originally their nightmare, fearing loss and death the same as Sui, but they feared losing their own lives, for in the waking world they were sick with polio, their proportions becoming twisted and bent like their forms in real life, just twisted to a new level. Their bodies crack and ache as they move around. Perhaps death would have been a kinder ending for these two. The twins willingly chose to stay in the nightmare, the lighthouse eagerly accepting such an offer. Free food is free food after all. As the children grew up, the less the lighthouse gained from them, hence why it's searching out into the ether to catch more prey. Although its eyes may have been bigger than its stomach when it comes to this meal. The perfectionist gained his phobias for sickness and untidiness from their near miss with death when they became sick. Now not allowing anything that could lead to his untimely demise within his flaw. The dentist replaces things that could cause pain and death too, your teeth. Both these boys have their ways of coping with their fears, but never actually got past them. If I were to actually turn this into a comic or internet series like The Sound of Nightmares, I would have the therapist that Sui sees before coming to the nowhere have a portrait of the twins in his office with a news article saying how they just disappeared one night, showing a interconnectedness between the protagonist and these secondary characters. Conclusion. This has been a small hiatus into my mind and a work in progress story. Overall, I've shown places, people, and themes hopefully to your liking. It hasn't been a major undertaking doing these half-ass renders, but I've really enjoyed the process, so I don't believe this will be the final video or anything. I'm sure I'll lunge into the world of Nowhere again once Little Nightmares 3 or even Reanimal is released. I'm highly anticipating them and the additions to the lore they'll add. Pretty keen to play 2-player with my brother, speaking of whom, 3D modelled, textured, rendered the beautiful chapter TV that's been floating in the dark, along with giving many suggestions such as barnacle eyes and arms, the dentist's body/leg positions, along with the scary mermaid scene washed up on the beaches. Hopefully this channel will grow eventually, but I'm not too concerned with the numbers. This is merely a place for my brother and I to post our projects. If you like them, good. If you don't, also good. If you want to expand on my expansions, feel free to do so, and just tag me in them. I'd love to see them. Also, my brother and I are helping with a world building project called Rust and Trenches, with a YouTube channel called The Monster Garden. If you haven't checked out that world that Lord Simon is creating, I highly recommend, especially if you're into nightmarish war hellscapes with messed up beings and magical systems that leave their users freaks of nature. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.